By the end of 1966 and into 1967, the Cultural Revolution was expanding. It wasn't just students against teachers anymore or Red Guards against authority figures. It was now something that was involving anyone and everyone in the country. There was no escaping Mao's revolution. There was a surprising level of ferocity and vindictiveness to the Cultural Revolution that shocked even people in the Communist Party. Here's one party member saying, quote, "Everything was smash, smash, smash. I could hardly believe what I heard. These people at the very top were truly planning to destroy everything they had built up over the past 2 decades, to smash and build something new." End quote. As 1966 turned into 1967, the attack on the Four Olds was promoted and encouraged by the party, and everyone in society was encouraged to take part in it. That's ideas, culture, customs, and habits, the Four Olds. Forget about being a student or a teacher for the moment. If you were a bookseller, a barber, a tailor, a photographer, any sort of job that was seen as not necessary for the proletariat revolution, any sort of business, this was a horrible spot to be. Commercial and business shops were closed down, people lost their livings, and everyday products and the way that they were bought and sold in the economy was completely changed. Anything with even a hint of the old traditional China was thrown out. All of a sudden, committees were formed to place stickers on items that were deemed to indicate class status. So labels were put on things, packages were put around items, and that way people knew that if you were going to buy a certain item, it had to have that sticker of approval from the party. To give an example here of how this would impact a person or a family trying to make a living, here's historian Frank Decatur talking about one company, quote, "The China Textile Company still had a hoard of 20,000 quilt covers, not to mention 15,000 meters of silk, rendered useless by quote-unquote feudal patterns." End quote. At any moment, someone from the Cultural Revolution could accuse your business or your product of being feudal, whatever that means, or being part of the property-owning class, or being counter-revolutionary. So your living could be impacted significantly. As everything old was getting thrown out, many people wondered what to replace all of these items with. And in the nebulous and turbulent world of the Cultural Revolution, where accusations and insults and fear and paranoia was hurled from one person to the next, there was only one cultural item that was safe. And due to the cult of personality that surrounded Mao, that item was Mao Zedong himself. Posters of Mao, pins, badges, books, audio recordings, slogans from the chairman. An entire economy was now devoted to Mao. People were buying and selling goods with any sort of likeness of Mao, and the economy was completely changed throughout China. And it's ironic that the planned economy is supposed to be all about efficiency, but what you see here is the inherently inefficient nature of this style of economy, in part because it's always reactive and never proactive. The economy as a whole had to wait and see who the next target of the Cultural Revolution was going to be, and once it became clear that this was just total chaos and there's no way to predict that accurately, the only thing that was safe was Mao Zedong himself. Historian Frank Decatur noted the interesting philosophical debate that came out of this, which is, how much do you charge for a poster of Mao Zedong? It kind of illustrates this point where if you charge too much, you could be seen as a property-owning heathen, But if you didn't charge enough, you could be showing your lack of reverence for the chairman. No-win situation there. It also illustrates this point that you always had to be careful of the counter-revolution. If you had a poster of Mao with a printing on it or some sort of out-of-date slogan or out-of-date element, look out, because all of a sudden you could be accused of being out of date and not up to touch with the way the revolution is going. Furthermore, imagine if you were one of the artists of one of these posters or one of these items that was being bought and sold proclaiming Mao one thing or another. I read about artists who got beat up and tortured for portraying Mao looking the wrong way, or some other minute detail to a poster or a painting that didn't necessarily portray Mao in the perfect light, and all of a sudden these artists were in danger, running for their lives, basically. You had underground markets and a black economy buying and selling these Mao Zedong items. Badges became incredibly popular, particularly among the Red Guards, trying to collect them and trying to collect pins and badges that represented Mao in different ways. And in general, this culture of personality that was surrounding Mao was impacting the planned economy, and it couldn't keep up. Eventually, Mao had to say, quote, "Give me back my airplanes," end quote. What he's implying there is, let's end the unnecessary production of all these goods and services proclaiming me, basically a god, and let's focus on the revolution again. But the irony, of course, is that Mao created this problem himself when he stirred up this cultural revolution where nothing is safe, no one knows who's the target and who's not the target. There's fear and chaos and paranoia in the streets, and he's reaping the rewards of the paranoia that came from the Cultural Revolution. I mentioned how being an artist was particularly dangerous during this time period, but perhaps the most dangerous profession in this crazy economy was being a bookseller or a librarian or anything related to knowledge and education or books or anything like that. Obviously, authoritarians hate books. Knowledge and wisdom is the enemy if you're an authoritarian. They want a monopoly on knowledge and wisdom. In previous episodes, we talked a lot about the people and the aspect of human beings being damaged, beaten, and destroyed by the Cultural Revolution. But another sad aspect of this whole thing is the destruction of knowledge and the destruction of culture and the total elimination of any diversity of thought, at least any robust diversity of thought. Libraries were decimated, book burnings that could be seen from miles away. Tens of thousands of books were eliminated, and of course all the knowledge and information that they contained gone forever. Reading about that made me sit back and think for a little bit about the significance of the ebook and the fact that perhaps these book burnings wouldn't be as devastating in the future. But anyway, religious buildings, mosques, churches, temples, you name it, fell victim to the ropes and the hammers from the Red Guards. Any sort of gravestones that weren't deemed people from the appropriate class were smashed and vandalized. Any foreigners or people who were seen as traditional or old in general had their gravestones decimated. I read about a cemetery where any gravestone that had a date on it before the communist liberation of China was leveled, because anything before a certain time period was a, quote, symbol of imperialism. In this process of destroying the four olds, as the Communist Party put it, they were also destroying the lives and the memories of a whole spectrum of people, from business owners and teachers, educators, to foreigners, religious people, artists, you name it, and the Cultural Revolution was expanding. One thing I've learned studying history is that usually bubbling under the surface in these large-scale tragedies and very often overlooked and underrated is the suffering of animals. And the Cultural Revolution was no different. Dogs were seen as a threat to public hygiene and had to be eliminated. Cats were seen as a symbol of bourgeois imperialism and decadence. Ray Yang, one of the Red Guards who wrote a memoir about her experience in the Cultural Revolution, talked about how a group of Red Guards grabbed a bag that she was carrying, which she was trying to hide her cat and smuggle it out of the danger area, but these boys grabbed the bag and swung it, hitting against the wall repeatedly. She said, quote, "The boys laughed. It was fun. They continued to hit him against the wall." End quote. Frank Decatur talks about how dead animals, in particular cats, would just be lying on the roadside in the capital of Beijing. Pigeons and birds were often a target, as we talked about during the episodes that I did on the Great Leap Forward, but they were seen as wasting food that peasants could eat. Forget about the environmental impact or the fact that pigeons and birds eat bugs that are going to eat your plants, so if you're going to destroy all those birds, you're going to end up actually having less food. So as the Cultural Revolution expanded, it wasn't just humans and people that suffered, but animals as well. And in order to begin that process of becoming a victim in the Cultural Revolution, you had to be, quote unquote, discovered as an enemy. One of the ways you were discovered was the home search. So Red Guards would show up at your door, typically in the late hours of the night or the early hours of the morning when you weren't suspecting it, and they rifled through your stuff in absolutely thorough searches. And probably the most psychologically damaging aspect of these searches, aside from losing your belongings and having things taken from you and really having nothing left to live with, was the fear and constantly living in fear of these Red Guards showing up at your house. Here's historian Frank Decatur talking about it, quote, "Some targets of the campaign, knowing that they would be next, went to bed fully clothed, waiting for their turn. Every night there were terrifying sounds of loud knocks on the door, objects breaking, students shouting, and children crying. But most ordinary people had no idea when the Red Guards would appear, and what harmless possessions might be seen as suspicious. They lived in fear." End quote. He also outlines some of the items that were seen as dangerous and some of the items that the Red Guards wanted to take. Stuff like articles of worship, religious items, luxury items, any sort of books or anything foreign. Obviously, weapons and money would be taken, and really just anything that had any sort of sign of a traditional or a wealthy or a property-based lifestyle. Make no mistake about it, these searches were thorough. One person said, quote, "They ripped open mattresses, cut the upholstery off the chairs and sofas, removed tiles from the walls of the bathroom, climbed into the fireplace and poked into the chimney, lifted floorboards, got onto the roof, fished in the water tank under the ceiling, and crawled under the floor to examine the pipes. The garden was turned into a sea of mud as the flower beds were dug up and plants were pulled from their pots." End quote. Typically, if you had something incriminating, the Red Guards were going to find it and you could possibly be thrown in jail or worse. But sometimes what was most sad about these home searches was when the Red Guards showed up and found nothing. Sometimes they arrived at the door and discovered bare walls in a house with literally nothing, maybe a mattress or two, because Red Guards had already come before and totally pilfered the house and the livelihood of the family in that home. Literally everything had already been destroyed or pawned off for food. A lot of the loot from these searches was destroyed, but some of it was kept and inventoried by leaders of the party. A lot of it was plundered by common thieves posing as Red Guards, or sometimes Red Guards themselves did the plundering, but troves and troves of what essentially was treasure was collected and itemized and kept by many of the top party members in China. And many of the top members got rich and kept the stuff for themselves. Sometimes it was assets totaling more than millions of dollars. Again, that could be money, that could be furniture, that could be antiques, that could be silk or any sort of rare textile item, could be watches or flags or weapons. It could be really anything of value. As the searches continued and as the fear spread and as the Cultural Revolution expanded to include everybody in communist China, the violence and the chaos was reaching unprecedented levels. As the society continued to spiral out of control, one question remained, which was a question that people both in the party and outside the party started to ask, which is, at what point is the army going to intervene here and take control? And if and when that happens, whose side are they going to be on?